Hello and welcome again to the Rising Generation Leadership Podcast with me, Errol Lawson, and our guest today, a very special guest, is Liz Wiseman. Liz is a researcher and executive advisor who teaches leadership to executives around the world. She's the author of the New York Times bestselling book Multipliers, How the Best Leaders Make Everyone Smarter, the Multiplier Effect, Tapping the Genius Inside Our Schools, and Wall Street Journal bestseller Rookie Smarts, Why Learning Beats Knowing in the New Game of Work. She's the CEO of the Wiseman Group, a leadership research and development firm headquartered in Silicon Valley, California. And some of her recent clients include Apple and AT&T and Disney, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Nike, Salesforce, Tesla, and Twitter. There is so much more I could say about Liz. But Liz, thank you for joining us today. And fill in any gaps, if you will, please, Liz, in your bio, and tell us what you're up to in the world right now.
Oh, first of all, that bio made me just a little bit tired. I think I covered it, but that's really my professional work. Probably my more important job is that I am a mom, or you might say a mom. Is it a mom? For children, and so that is probably my most important job. It's been my hardest job, and it's certainly been the job where I've learned how to lead more than all of my other research combined.
How old are your children?
Well, my oldest is 23.
Okay.
And married. I have a 21-year-old daughter who's actually taken a little break from college to go serve an 18-month mission.
Wow.
And so she's off serving as a missionary for a year and a half. Awesome. And I have a 19-year-old son who's on a gap year between high school and college. And I've got a little 14-year-old son who is enjoying the blessings of being an only child at home, like way too much parental attention and affection and love and interference. He pines for his siblings to be back at home.
Beautiful, beautiful. The joys of parenting, I'm sure. It's great they're doing so well.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, it's so hard to see your children go, but it is so rewarding to see them making their way in the world. So it's great. Yeah, so that's filling in my bio and what I'm up to. I spend my days running around the world teaching leadership, and so I get to teach leadership and learn a lot about leadership. And most of my work is about how do we help organizations develop multiplier leaders and learning cultures, and how do you really build a high contribution culture inside your organization where, everyone's working at their best, and where every mind matters, and, where all voices get heard. So that's what I do.
Awesome. I'm going to get into your story and stuff, but just a question came to my mind. I mean, you've been to some of the top, what we'd probably call the top, even the unicorns, you might call them, your Googles, your Facebooks, and your Twitters, and what have you. And I'm just interested to know, really, like, going into those organizations and observing those cultures, what do you notice about the way they do team or the way they lead people and get the best out of people that's different perhaps to some other organizations?
I think some of these companies, these leading tech companies, and some of these unicorns, as you've mentioned, although a lot of the unicorns are leaving their unicorn status because so many of them are going public right now, is they do tend to think really differently, and they think very differently about speed. They think very differently about risk and mistakes. And, they're kind of tend to be anti-perfection cultures. And they tend to think very differently about talent and leadership. And I'll tell you one of the key differences. Google is the one that probably, of the ones I work with, that is kind of out on the forefront of this, is they don't look at leaders as, not only do they not look at it as a position, like something at the top of a hierarchy. Lots of organizations do that, but they don't see it as a permanent state. They have a really I call it kind of fluid leadership, but they have a very fluid orientation, meaning you have to be comfortable being the leader and taking charge and having a vision and having conviction and doing all those leaderly like kinds of things. But you also have to be equally skilled and comfortable, kind of rolling back and being a follower, more like the model of the geese in flight that, you take your turn leading and then you fall back. But it's not like you lead for a year or two and then you kind of step down. It's not like that at all. It's more like in the 2:00 meeting, you're the boss, and you step up and you own it and you lead. But you walk down the hall for the 3:00 meeting, and in that meeting you're not the boss. You are a team member and you're following the lead of someone else. And most of us are comfortable doing that, following the lead of like a superior officer, so to speak. But it's where you follow the lead of a peer, or one of your employees is now responsible for an initiative or a project, and you just step into that follower role with grace. And it's this ability to ebb and flow between these roles very comfortably that I think is pretty consistent, because that's how you have to work to move fast.
So, do you know whether they actually started out with that architecture for the culture in mind, or is it something that they developed over a period of time? And I guess part B to the question is it possible for somebody to reinvent their culture, in a sense, to bring it in line with that kind of culture you described?
I think so. My answer to this is probably not coming from a research point of view. I try to do most of my work from a research point of view. This is really coming more from just a personal observation about how some of these leading companies work. But, very little of this is sort of strategy built in a war room and on a set of PowerPoint decks that gets cascaded out. It's more just a process of trial and error and seeing what works.
Right.
And what doesn't work, and iterating and adapting. Right. I think planning is overrated and reaction is underrated in a lot of businesses. Our reactionary skills are so important in a world that's changing really fast. This is kind of part of the premise to this book I did called, Rookie Smarts, Why Learning Beats Knowing in the New Game of Work, is because reaction is about observation and insight and the ability to see something that's going well and saying, boy, we should do more of that, or things that aren't going well, we should do less of that. And it's about adjusting, and it comes from a root of humility. Which when we're new to something, we've got in abundance, but when we're at the top of our game and we're leaders in an industry, it's a little harder to be humble.
And I guess it's also about being able to create that psychological freedom, if you like, for people, and safety, where people can feel free to be reactionary and make a mistake and get it wrong, or free to express how they feel about what's going on or not going on in the organization, without fear of any kind of comeback, and without that freedom and that space and that trust to be able to just be, I guess you have the opposite effect, right?
Oh, absolutely. And, I think we underappreciate how much psychological safety we need to learn. And, I mentioned that I've learned so much about leadership from raising children. But think about when a child is young, how much, all of their learning comes from trial and error. Just think about the process of learning to walk. And imagine if you were a little pre-toddler, you're a crawler trying to learn to walk, and if you made a wrong step, your parents came and slapped you. Or yelled at you or ridiculed you, you wouldn't learn to walk. I'm not sure the human spirit is that indomitable that you would you learn to be nervous and hold things back, and we extend to children this incredible space to try it, to experiment. Okay, that didn't go well. It's okay. Get back up, try, do this. Like society generally extends this grace to young people while they're learning. But it's amazing how we withdraw that sort of grace and forgiveness in the professional world. But when you create safety for people to experiment in reasonable ways, man, do you get these kind of hyper learning organizations?
Fascinating. I think it's fascinating. How did you, like, where did you start? What's your origin story? What were you doing before you got into being this amazing, internationally recognized, best-selling author, leadership coach? What was happening before then? How did you transition into this?
Well, when you asked about my origin story, I was going to go way back, and I was going to tell you that I was like the daughter of a donut maker.
Hey.
and I started working when I was 13. I worked in my father's donut shop. I think I broke every like health code rule because, I used to like eat the donuts while I was serving donuts. But anyway, so I am the daughter of a donut maker and started working very young. I've always worked. But what was I doing before this? I was working at Oracle. So I went to business school, and when I graduated from college, I guess it was a little bit of a bold move. All my colleagues in business school were going to work for like reasonable companies like Procter and Gamble and IBM, and I had job offers from IBM and Procter and Gamble, which is why I remember that. Lots were going into consulting. I didn't. I wanted to go work in a place that was breaking the rules, and I think maybe I've always had a little bit of a rebellious streak to me. But I went to work for a small maverick software company in Silicon Valley, which is where I grew up. I wanted to come back home, and I went to work for Oracle when they were kind of still young, very much in their adolescence, and I had the most amazing experience there. So I went thinking I was going to go work for a year or two and then maybe go back to school and get a PhD and become a professor. Well, I got addicted to this culture, and it was this thrilling place where
What's it like?
it was. So they hired for three things, particularly in their new college grads, and they hired for this sort of trifecta of talent. It was sort of this oddball. They hired for raw intelligence, like kind of not freaky smart, but just people who had a lot of raw horsepower, intellect-wise. And then they looked for people with kind of a freaky achievement orientation.
Okay.
And then they looked for people who were nice. And now I worked there a lot of years, and I can tell you that sometimes they compromised on the nice part of this. and they recruited at 17 schools, top schools in the US. And I didn't go to one of these schools. And I think because I didn't go to one of those schools, it made me particularly appreciative that I had this job, and very, very appreciative that I got to work with all these really smart, driven people. But because of this, what happened, Oracle was growing really, really fast, and they just kind of hired a lot of bright, driven people. And so their whole approach to talent management wasn't experience-based. It wasn't, well, gee, have you done this 5 times before? Do you have 5 to 10 years of experience? Their strategy was, well, you seem bright enough, you're in charge now. And I got one of those jobs where I'd been there maybe a year. And they said, you know what, we need someone to manage training for the company. Liz, you're now in charge of training for the company, and we need a university. We want Oracle University. So could you go build a university for the company?
For the whole company?
Yeah, for the whole company.
Oh,
and
right.
Errol, I'm like 25 years old.
Wow, what an opportunity.
Yeah, but that's not how I was looking at it. I'm just like, my orientation was, what's wrong with these people? Like, do they not understand that I am still a child? And this is a grown-up job. And I pointed that out. I'm like, do you guys not, like, are there no adults here to supervise us? And it, in fact, I went back to my boss years later, and I'm like, Bob, like, why did you do that? Why did you give me this big, oversized job? Like, did you see some, like, genius or capability in me, or were you just a little bit desperate? And he kind of laughed and he said, Liz, it was a little of both. A little of both. And so anyway, so I got thrown into management really young, and I had this amazing experience there where just at the moment I'd figured out how to do one job, they'd give me another and then another. And now I'm in an executive role and I'm managing lots of people and big budgets and sort of mission critical operations for the company. It was great until I started to get good at what I was doing. And like most people would have thought I had a great gig. You know, I had an important job. I was well paid. I was admired, you know, blah, blah, blah. But I was bored, you know, sort of at what someone would say would be, you know, the pinnacle of success in that kind of role. I just felt like I finally know how to do what I do and the thrill is gone. And so so my transition to what I do today was I was actually out looking for a job I was underqualified for again. Like I wanted that thrilling experience
Right.
of being a little in over my head. So I really went looking for something I didn't know how to do, which is what, you know, I started by doing some executive coaching, which I was new to that, and then had a few ideas that needed to be researched and written about. So I decided, well, you know, let me become sort of a researcher and author, and had never done anything like when I wrote my first book, which is Multipliers. And Errol, I know you are familiar with that one. I had never, not only had I never written a book before, I had never written anything longer than like an email note. Like there were no articles to warm up. It was just, and I think that's how I ended up doing what I'm doing, and I love it.
It's great. And along that journey, was there like a moment where maybe you had like a turning point? Maybe you're heading in one direction and something happened, like an epiphany, a light bulb moment that caused you to go into a completely different direction? Can you tell us that story?
You know, there was a moment. I mean, there's so many moments that shaped me as a leader. But there was a moment where I realized I just wasn't passionate about the work that I was doing. And it came through some really negative feedback. And there was a woman who worked on my team. I was now, because I had done a good job at so many things, I kept getting these bigger jobs. And I was now managing a commercial education organization, you know, that taught technical training. And I really honestly wasn't that excited about what I was doing. And one of the people on my team, she had said, I want to get the language on this right, because it kind of hurt at the time. She had said, like, Liz leads with charisma, but we need someone who leads with content.
Ooh.
It was something to that effect. And at first it stung. Because one, I'm like, I'm not sure I'm that charismatic. But I didn't like the thought of like, okay, like, I don't want to be a cheerleader. And I'm like, well, what does that mean, content? Do I lack substance? And then I realized she's absolutely right, that I don't have like a deep interest in what we're doing. I'm just managing this division. And it was a lot of revenue went through this division. And I realized, yeah, I don't have a passion for this. And the organization deserves a leader who wakes up thinking about how do we, you know, teach the masses in database administration skills, because I didn't care that much. And that was one of the moments that gave me courage.
Wow.
You know, to say, no, I really am going to go do this. And then there was another moment, because I left Oracle where I had this big job. And, you know, when you went to a party, I don't drink, but, you know, let's say you go to a cocktail party and everyone's making small talk, and people ask you what you do, and you tell them, oh, I'm a vice president at Oracle. I'm responsible for Oracle University. Everyone goes, ooh, that's really impressive. Wow, you know. And then I leave and I start up a coaching practice, and people ask you what you do, and you tell them, and then they start looking for someone else to talk to,
Right.
someone
Right.
who's
Coaching.
more,
What's that?
what's that? And, oh, you're on your own. And I remember there was this moment I was having lunch with one of the guys that used to be on my management team back at Oracle, and Amit's his name. And he kept kind of probing. I'd been gone maybe 6 months, and he kept saying, okay, Liz, like, have you had your midlife crisis, basically? And when are you coming back to the corporate world? Like, we know that you're probably not coming back to Oracle, but, and of course, there's a lot of recruiters calling about these kinds of jobs. And he's like, yeah, we're just all waiting because we're going to like get the band back together. Like, we're going to follow you and we're all going to go. And I'm like, Amit, I'm not coming back. I'm not coming back. I love what I do now as a coach and teaching leadership. And this is the moment that kind of got me. He goes, okay, yeah, like I see it, but Liz, it's such a waste of your talent. And that wasn't meant to be an insult. I think the feedback from the woman who had worked for me, I think that was meant to be a little bit of an insult, a little bit of a jab, but that wasn't meant that way at all. But what he was saying is, like, you're good at this corporate gig. You're good at leading a team. You're good at managing like the politics and the dynamics and like figuring out how to navigate and lead in this complex organization. And like, you off on your own, like, it's a waste, Liz. And like, I heard that, and there was part of me that wanted to like retreat back, like with him back into the safe corporate world where, you show up at a party and people go, ooh, you work for Google, you're an executive there. Ooh. And I'm like, no, I actually don't think this is a waste of my talent. I actually think what I'm doing for me is a complete and total fulfillment
Oh, what do you think the message is
of my God-given talent.
in that story, in that example, that experience? What's the message you think someone listening right now is perhaps in a similar situation? What was the message there?
Well, it's probably a little bit of, oh man, I want to get the Shakespeare quote right. Now, I know you live up in his home territory, but is it to thine own self be true? I don't quite know what that is, but I think self-knowledge is really, really important. And, it's so easy to be swayed by the world and to do what the world deems as successful. And to make those voices louder than your inner voice that tells you who you really are. And it's very easy to let the world be louder than the Lord. And I think one of the things I've had to learn throughout my life is to be whole in my relationship with God and me, and what is my God-given gifts. I, like probably a lot of people listening, I deeply, deeply believe that we are endowed with talent and gifts, some spiritual, some very temporal, from God. And it is, and certainly Matthew like 25 teaches us this, that, it is our stewardship on this earth to take those gifts and to multiply them and to bring back to the Lord, like basically a developed and grown version of what he created in us. But actually my belief goes much further than that I believe it's not only our duty to do that for ourselves, I think it's our greatest honor to do that for other people, to help other people find and grow their God-given gifts. And there have been so many times in my life where the world has wanted me to do something, and I've had to say, that's great for somebody else, but that's not my deal with the Lord. It's not how I was created, and it's not how I'm going to magnify his glory. And I don't want to say that I've made all my career decisions from this sort of point of like what I might call like a divine heritage and understanding. It's just, there's been moments where it's been really hard to shut down the world and say, I know better. and I actually have access to divine insight that can help me guide my life.
It's good. What's been your biggest challenge in your leadership journey?
I think, I've had so many thresholds that I've had to bust through. Like the first was just figuring out, what, it's not about you. Like get over yourself and get over your own sense of productivity and importance. But I think the biggest challenge for me that's been consistent has been really learning how to work with people who are different than me. And I don't mean...
Why is that so important anyway?
Well, I know I have that thought. Some days I'm like, I don't want to work with people who are different than me. Like all that diversity talk, I don't like any of it. Like I want, and I don't have a hard time working with people who look different than I do. I don't have a hard time working with people who are racially different or culturally different or like gender different. I have a hard time working with people whose brains work differently than mine.
Right.
Because honestly, like all that like diversity mumbo jumbo, I want to shut it all out. And I'm like, no, I'll tell you what my perfect team looks like. My perfect team looks like people of many colors, shapes, varieties who think just like me, who share my same strengths. Maybe even I'll take people who share my same weaknesses because we'll all like totally get each other. And I want to work with people who finish my sentences and I can finish theirs and we can communicate in a glance and it's sort of frictionless. Like that's really what I want. But of course I know better. And I know that that's not what produces great work. There's a moment. So this is after I've left Oracle. I've started up this coaching practice, which has now evolved into this research and thought leadership practice. And we've been lucky to have a lot of really, really great resonance with our work and a lot of great success. And so we've got this team. There's 9 of us on this core team. And one of the guys on the team who is really kind of works and things differently than I do, he says, hey, Liz, how about in our next team meeting? How about we do this? Why don't we do a Myers-Briggs like personality profile? And then we'll use that as like a team building experience. And inside my head, I'm thinking, oh, that's a terrible idea. That's a terrible, terrible idea. But my outside behavior is different. I go, oh yeah, Rob, that's a great idea. Why don't you do it? Because I know I'm supposed to say that. So I say it. And we all take those Myers-Briggs tests and then, they aggregate the results and they put it on a little chart. And then we talk about it. And I look at the chart. Now, Errol, are you familiar with the Myers-Briggs?
I am, yeah.
Okay. So, for people who are listening, it's a really popular personality profile, and it has 4 different dimensions that it looks at how people work. So on one of the dimensions, which is kind of like your orientation to getting things done, there's the P, the perceivers, and the J for the judgers. And I'm a J. I'm a massive J. I love deadlines and to-do lists. And, I sort of respond to concrete and pressure. So I look at the scattergram of everyone on the team. I'm the only J. There's 1 J and there's 8 Ps.
Okay.
Receivers, who like love people, they listen, they live in the moment, they're sort of mindful. They just might like miss the, Friday at 5:00 deadline kind of thing. I look at this and Errol, I have a complete and total freak out. We sometimes refer to this as the time like Liz had an adult tantrum because I see all these Ps and I'm like, oh, that's the problem. This is the problem we have here. Like, I'm the only one concerned about the Gantt charts and the project plans. No wonder I'm holding the burden. And my husband and I work together, and I look at his profile. I am an ENTJ.
I'm an ENTJ as well.
And what's that?
I'm an ENTJ as well.
See, I just love you a little bit more just knowing that. Now, my husband is an ISFP.
Okay.
Polar opposite to mine. Exact opposite on every dimension. And I looked at that and I'm like, oh yeah, I knew that. And then I look at my assistant who is responsible for my schedule and and making sure like the trains run on time. And she's a P as well. And I feel betrayed. I'm like, Judy, you're a P? How could this be? You are like the J in my life. And she just sort of very sweetly says, Liz, I am really like a P, but I just do this J thing because that's my job and it's what you need from me. And so basically she's saying, like, I contort myself for you and the team.
Wow.
And I was appreciating that, but I was so just like distraught. And I just, they refer to it as the time I threw a tantrum, because I'm like, okay, I will allow you P's to live. I will let you all live and work here, but I need more J friends. I need people who think like me. I need some other J friends. And so they all said, okay, we get it, Liz, let's get you some J friends. And so when we hired the next couple people into the firm, we looked for this.
Right.
And we had some sort of a fun way of doing it. So, that was kind of one of my worst moments.
Yeah.
Where I'm just like, no, I really want to work with people who think like me and work like me, because it's easier for me to trust that they're going to get it done.
That leads really well into my next question. So I'm going to segue, because I know we've spoken before our chat today. So guys listening, you probably know that I've written the book now, The 5 Core Abilities of Highly Effective Leaders. And one of the 5 core abilities that we identified was the ability to get the best out of the people you lead, whether you like them or not, or whether they like you or not, in fact. And your seminal piece of work is the book Multipliers, which talks about that, really, how we can be multipliers and develop multipliers. Just speak to us a bit about the book and what a multiplier is, and the opposite of a multiplier, a diminisher, is. And it'd be good to hear, just fresh from you as the author, just your take on how you came to that understanding and what it's all about.
Well, Multipliers as a book it's an examination of why some leaders who are smart themselves seem to shut down or underutilize the intelligence of others. I call these leaders diminishers, whereas other leaders that I call multipliers, the leader, him or herself, they're smart and capable, but they use their intelligence in a way that creates intelligence and capability in people around them. They become the multipliers to the talent of their team.
Right.
And that's the idea. I mean, in a nutshell, they're leaders who do truly bring out the best in everyone around them. And they do. Errol, I love the twist that you put on this, that, they're leaders who bring out the best in others, even if they don't like them. And that's, I think, why this has been my biggest challenge is learning how to work with people who think
wow.
and act differently than I do, because I've had to go through this maturation process as a leader to being okay when people do it differently than you, but then realizing that not only do they do it differently, they do it better, and learning to create more space. And it's one of the things that we find these multiplier leaders do is they create space for other people to step up and own it, to have a different point of view.
I know you
leverage all the intelligence of an organization.
You talk about the accidental diminisher. What's one of those?
Oh, as I began studying this, it was so clear these differences in these multiplier and diminisher leaders. But what became more apparent to me, the more I dug into it, is that most of the diminishing that's happening in our workplaces, and I would also say in our churches, in our communities, our churches, our families, most of the diminishing is coming from the well-intended leader.
Right.
The good person trying to be a good boss.
Wow.
And they're doing what seems to be the right things, but they end up having a diminishing effect nonetheless. And often, so I've looked at and sort of uncovered so many different ways, like the idea guy I'm an idea guy, who loves ideas, loves to toss out ideas. And it's not that we think our ideas are better than anyone else's. We just think we're getting the party started. And that we think if we toss out ideas, other people will do the same. But actually what we find is that people get idea lazy around people who are idea rich. Or another really common way is rescuers, people who are big-hearted and they want to see people succeed and be successful. And when people are struggling, they extend a hand of help. And sometimes it's a heroic, like, look at me act, but more often than not, it's just almost like a benevolent sort of Christ-like, hey, let me help you, you're struggling. But when leaders help people too early or too often, they create dependency, and they end
Right.
up stifling people who actually need to suffer a little bit on their own. Every great boss I ever had lacked just a little bit of compassion, if you know what I mean.
Hard edge to.
Yeah. And they weren't like bad people who lacked compassion. It's that they asked me to do hard things, and then they didn't mind watching me struggle to figure it out. They didn't
Yeah.
step in and do it for me.
Right. So, um, how does someone even understand or know if it's in their blind spot, right? It's not even on their radar. How do they figure out whether they're a multiplier or diminisher? And then if they want to become a multiplier, how do they do that?
They really need kind of a rear view mirror, because it's really hard to see things in your blind spot. Every time I drive, I'm always just amazed that we don't hit cars in our blind spot, because there's such an opportunity to miss things. And to see something in your blind spot, you need help. You need a colleague to tell you this. You need feedback. Now, if you go to people and ask, am I a diminisher? They'll say no. Or if you ask, am I an accidental diminisher? No. But if you ask this question, how might I, with the very best of intentions, be having a diminishing impact, or shutting down ideas or creativity or energy in other people? That's a question that people can answer, because you made it safe.
That's good.
The most amazing leaders that I have worked with have all gone beyond just their own self-awareness of, ooh, I think I'm a little bit of a pace setter, to going beyond self-reflection and self-knowledge, and asking other people, what do you see?
That's good.
Like, I see this, like, maybe I'm doing this, what do you see?
Is there a process you could recommend to somebody? Maybe even a resource that you have, perhaps, that they could potentially use as a way of getting that data?
Yeah, here's kind of our latest and best practice. There's a chart in the new edition of the book, and I'm flipping open my book right now. It's in Appendix E, I know that, and it's on page 340. It's in the appendix, and what it is, it's a chart that has 9 accidental diminisher tendencies, and then it's mapped against, I don't know, maybe about 10 or 11, maybe 10 multiplier practices. And the very best practice we see is when somebody takes a little chart like that and circles, hey, here's what I think my diminishing tendency is, and here's the leadership practice that I think I could use to be a better leader. And then they hand that piece of paper to the people they work with.
Right.
And it's not a complicated feedback exchange. It's not like, gee, Errol, would you tell me, like, all the ways I'm a terrible leader?
Yeah.
Like, I really don't want to know all the ways I'm a terrible leader.
Yeah.
It's very contained. I would just say, if Errol, you and I work together, I would say, here's what I see. I think I'm a bit of an optimist. And then I would say, what do you see? And maybe just circle it. It's funny, we find that giving people a pen and a piece of paper and asking them to circle what you see as my blind spot is so much easier.
Does that give you the level of honesty you need?
It certainly is a starting point. I would not in any way suggest it's an ending point.
Okay.
But it's an on-ramp into a difficult conversation.
It's really good. And
because not everyone has like black belt levels of skills in crucial conversations or radical candor. Some of these systems that help us talk about hard things.
Sure. Are you convinced that somebody can become a multiplier? Everyone can become a multiplier, I should say?
Well, yes to the first, no to the second. I am convinced that people can become better leaders. that I have seen this happen, particularly when people's diminishing tendencies are accidental. I have seen so many cases where people have radically changed the way they lead based on some very simple insights and some small shifts in behavior. It happens all the time. Can everybody do it? No. No, I know lots of people who have no real desire to do anything differently,
Yeah.
and they're not going to do it. And the sad thing is, if you are listening, well, one, you might be someone who has no intention, but I don't think you'd be listening to Errol's podcast if that were the case. But you might be working for someone who really has no intention. And in that case, it might be time to not just get a new job, but to shop for a very different kind of a boss.
Can someone be a great leader and not a multiplier?
Oh, sure. I think, multiplier is one way of looking at what really great leaders do. It was, when I put the book out there in the world, it was I had no intention that it would be like a be all end all statement of what good leadership looks like. I was studying something actually very narrow. I was looking at what is the effect that leadership has on the intelligence and capability of others. Why do some leaders dumb us down while others sort of smarten us up?
Okay.
So I was intending it to be extremely narrow, but what ended up coming out of my research and what the book I think represents for a lot of people and a lot of companies, it represents a pretty definitive, broad
Cookie
statement of
cutter
what
almost.
kind of what good leadership looks like in today's messy world.
Yeah.
Where there really is just too much for any one person to know, and you really need the intelligence of the whole team kicking in.
That's awesome. And let's just dig into you a bit and some of your habits again in our quick fire round. So, John Maxwell says that the secrets of your success are hidden in your daily routine. What does the first 90 minutes of your day typically look like?
I think I break all of the productivity rules. John would be, who's a dear friend of mine, would be very disappointed if he looked at the first minutes of my day. But I actually have a very interesting way I spend the first 90 minutes of my day. I roll out of bed and I drive down to our church and I teach a Bible study class to teenagers. This is at
6 o'clock in the morning.
6:30 in the morning. And we do it Monday through Friday, and they do it through the whole school year. And most of these students do it for the 4 years that they're in
every day.
High school. Every day.
You're kidding.
Every day. Yeah. So these kids are amazing.
What church is this?
Well, this is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but I want to be clear: these kids are amazing who come.
They gotta be
total zombies. They're total zombies. Now, I don't want to create any perception that they're like on the ball. Like most of them are total knuckleheads. Like sometimes, like I have to whack them with the Bible maps, to even get them to pay attention. But they're in this zombie-like state. Wow. I'm probably in a zombie-like state, but somehow.
Why do you do that?
Well, I don't know.
What do you get out of it?
Well, I'll tell you one thing I get out of it. It's extremely humbling, if not humiliating, because I get to teach leadership to big companies, top executives. I get to teach in some pretty amazing venues. Yeah. And honestly, I get a lot of accolades from the world for it. Yeah. But I'll tell you what, these teenagers don't care a bit about any of that. And so it's very humbling to put all of your worldly accomplishments aside and just go down and spend an hour between 6:30 and 7:30, just trying to teach the kids to sort of dig into the scriptures and learn from it. But so it's really not about me. Let me tell you why these kids do it. A couple years ago, I really wanted to know, why do they do it? Do their parents make them do it? Is it a way to get into college? And so I did a survey. And the number one response, and it was overwhelmingly the number one response, was they do it to be able to get through a day of high school. They do it because it makes them feel good. Like they feel the spirit.
It's brilliant, man.
In their life. I'm not sure they learn a thing. in some ways, but I think it's a chance to get a little bit of a remember of who you are.
Yeah.
Because who
Connect.
you are is not just a kid going to high school.
Mm.
Like, you're a child of God, and remembering that helps people get through. But anyway, and I don't do that every day because I travel a lot. I have a co-teacher, so
Okay. Sure.
we share that teaching load. But that's why I
Brilliant.
spend most of my mornings.
And what are the key habits that have contributed to your success? What other key habits are there?
Oh, I don't have very good habits at all, but I'll tell you what I am is I'm a chronic to-do list maker. Like, I'm the kind that makes to-do lists for Saturdays, and and if I do something that's not on my list, I write it on there so I can get the satisfaction of crossing it off.
And what's your biggest weakness as a leader?
I have a whole lot of things I don't do well and weaknesses. I'd have to say, if I was really honest with myself, I think my biggest weakness is sort of a spiritual weakness. I'm far too dependent on self. I'm over dependent on self. My mom once said, she said, Liz, your problem, and she said this with lots of motherly love. She said, Liz, your problem is that you get enamored by your own capability.
Interesting.
Meaning, like, when you're facing something difficult, your first reaction is to sort of find capability within,
Uh-huh.
rather than rely on the help of others, or maybe worse, try to do it yourself rather than relying on the help of the Lord, which
So, sounds like ENTJ qualities right there.
totally, totally,
Yeah.
it's my blessing and my curse.
Yeah. And what's your biggest strength as a leader?
I would like to, like, if you ask me, I would say, oh, I'm funny. I have a sense of humor. Like, I've been laughing my whole way through life, and it actually gets me in and out of some situations. But
Good.
I, I once asked my husband what my greatest strength was. He says, you're generous. I'm like, oh, I'd never seen myself as generous. But I think from a work standpoint, I think my greatest strength is I don't overthink things. I just jump in and do. I'm a doer.
That's good.
And I don't overthink, but it's funny, I'm a thought leader. That's sort of my job. And
Mm.
people say, like, we really appreciate, like, the depth of your thinking. But strangely, I don't overthink, which means I don't beat myself up. I don't, get in analysis paralysis. I just try to keep moving.
And who have been your top three most significant mentors in your journey so far?
Probably Bob Shaver, who gave me my first big job
Uh-huh.
at Oracle. As a thought leader, my biggest mentor was Dr. C.K. Prahalad at the University of Michigan. Just an amazing management thinker who really taught me how to think.
Uh-huh.
And he passed, about 10 years ago, and I miss him terribly. And in my life, my mother has been my greatest mentor. If I can grow up and be like my mom, I'm pretty ambitious. That's
That's
what I would
great.
say.
And if I could dig a bit deeper into each of those three relationships, um, what has been the best single piece of advice you've gotten from each of those three people?
Bob Shaver, the vice president I went to work for, he gave me a great piece of advice. I was sort of interviewing for a job in his organization, internally interviewing. And I was telling him what I was excited about, what I wanted to do. And, like, I wanted to build this management curriculum at Oracle. And he said, that's terrific, and we appreciate your passion and blah, blah, blah. But he said, we have a different problem here. It was actually a technical training problem. And he said, like, why don't you help your boss get that problem solved? Like, basically what he said to me was, make yourself useful. Rather than focus on what you want to do, look and see what needs to be done and go do it. And that advice has been so consistent across my whole career. Like, I appreciate when people want to work from a place of passion, but the kind of people I want to work with are people who can get passionate about what needs to get done.
Right.
Like, you know what, we've got a crisis here. Hey, let's jump in and fix this. I think part of the rising generation has perhaps a little bit of a misguided view of passion. And Bob Shaver taught me this.
Beautiful. And then Dr. CK?
C.K. Prahalad, he told me when I left Oracle and I told him about the kind of work I wanted to do, he said, Liz, stay unencumbered. your work will be more influential if you stay unencumbered. And I've worked really hard to keep our company small. We don't have big offices. We don't have a lot of expense. We work from our homes. We operate sort of with a modest footprint because I want to be out there doing good work, not figuring out how to get work and keep work.
Right.
And I think it's what it's allowed me to be influential is to stay unencumbered by things of the world. Now, I don't want anyone to think I'm like operating like in a yurt or something with, one pair of shoes and 2 shirts.
And then your mom?
Oh, my mom, she's such a role model as a parent, and she taught me something, so many things, but the one that I would maybe call out would be some parenting advice. She said, with kids, always give them a way out. And I think in lots of situations, whether it's with our kids or our colleagues or employees, we get into these standoffs with people, and we give ultimatums or we back people in a corner so that like there's no chance for them to do right. And she said, always give like kids a way out, meaning a way to make a good choice.
Right.
And I have tried to follow that advice, and it has kept me out of a lot of standoffs.
Interesting. Thank you for that. We've got a little baby, and Gabriella, she's 15 months old now, one more on the way as well. And that's good parenting advice right there. Thank you. How do you okay, so you've got the book done, right? And the book is out and it's, it's all over the world. How do you now, what's your product ecosystem, if you like, for getting your message to market to people, to organizations?
Well, we have a lot of different ways that we get the message out. We have the book, and I told the publisher when we were publishing the book in its first edition about 8 years ago, I said, I don't see this book as a calling card book, meaning I don't want people to read this book and then like phone us up and want to work with us.
Okay.
It's not a way to generate and sustain a consulting practice. I want this to be a message that goes out to the world independent of me or consultants or programs. And so the book is the primary way that message is out there. And we want people to be able, and we've put a lot more in, I put a lot more into that book so that it really stands on its own. It's not dependent on me to come to complete the story. But, I'm out speaking constantly. We have a series of workshops and seminars that we do for companies all around the world. And we've got this wonderful network of partners that we've built over the last few years who are all certified in multipliers. They also work with the ideas that come from the book Rookie Smarts, and they're out there teaching and coaching, and it all happens without me, which is which was the goal.
And so the book has done that, what you thought you didn't intend it for it to do. It's actually done that by design.
Well, and far more, at HarperCollins, my publisher, Hollis Heimbach, she and her colleagues referred to it, at least for its first couple years of life, they referred to it as a little book that could, I don't think they ever expected it to be as, popular is not the right word, ubiquitous.
Impactful.
Yeah, impactful as it has. I think they like the idea, but, the book is resonated around the world, and, it's one of my favorite authors. I don't know if you've talked with him, Dan Pink, who's written Drive. He's got a new book called When. He's just one of these authors I admire. He's just so amazing. And he said to me a couple months ago, he said, well, he's like, Multipliers is just perennial. It's not going away. And it was a wonderful observation coming from someone whose work I admire so much. But I do think it captures a bit of the zeitgeist of the leadership challenges and the solutions for kind of this era that we're in.
Brilliant. And what's the one thing you're most fired up about right now?
Well, I've got a new research project, which I'm really excited about. We're looking at not only we're, we're looking at perhaps the best way to increase the capacity and capability of leaders is not training leaders; it's actually training their followers and doing more to equip contributors with the kinds of skills they need to be easily led and to be able to make a big contribution. So I'm looking at kind of the flip side of leadership right now.
Interesting.
And yeah, I'm
Interesting.
thrilled by it.
What have you discovered? I would think my initial thought was, well, everything rises and falls on leadership, and if that person is a lead who's leading the organization, no matter how good the followers get at being easy to lead, that lead is still the lead. That's my first reaction.
Yeah, well, it sounds very John Maxwellian. And
I'm in the John Maxwell team as well, I have to confess.
yeah, well, and I just got done spending a week with John as we did a little speaking tour through Australia. I love John, love his teaching. I do think leaders are lids, but the problem is lid can really contain people, and I think there's a lot of people who have been poorly led historically and have learned to not step up. And you can increase the lid of the leader, but if you increase the lid of the leader, it doesn't mean the water level in the jar automatically rises. It just means it now has the capacity to do that. And it's almost like you have to train people, like, you know what, you can step up, you can speak up, you can take ownership. Your boss wants you to take that and run with it.
Right.
And so I think
it's a combination.
It's part of the solution to raise the lid of leaders, but it's also part of the solution to raise the water level for contributors.
I get you. I'm with you.
Thank you. But, I haven't finished this research cycle, so I don't know kind of what the right balance of that is, but I'm going to try to figure it out.
Okay. Nice. We look forward to reading about that, hearing about that. And is there a book or resource you'd recommend? Now, I'm going to step in and recommend straight away Multipliers. Guys, if you've not read Multipliers, do check it out. I highly recommend it. It's on Amazon there, and there'll be a link in the chat. So in the show notes, rather, on the podcast page to the book. But is there another book you'd recommend to a leader or entrepreneur that's listening right now?
I would recommend, any of John's books are a good start. I particularly like, the 5 levels of leader. But a couple of my favorites from the classic category would probably be Good to Great by Jim Collins.
Yeah.
I think it's just a phenomenal piece of research and insight. Another leadership classic would be The Leadership Challenge by Posner, Kuznis and Posner.
Yeah.
Something more contemporary. One of my favorite leadership books is Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull.
Okay.
And I love and hate this book. And I'll tell you why I love it and hate it. I love it because I just think it captures the kinds of leadership you need to get innovation and creativity. It's Ed Catmull's story at Pixar. So he, as I think the founder, but has been the long-serving CEO of Pixar. And it's about the process they use in the company that delivers blockbuster after blockbuster. And the reason why I love it and hate it is because he did in one book what it took me both Multipliers and Rookie Smarts to do. Like he shows this like very multiplier-esque leadership model, but then also like how they end up creating all this creativity using this kind of fresh approach. And his book is like interesting and funny, and you will never watch a Pixar movie the same after reading this book, because you go, ooh, that's how they do it. It's not an accident that every one of their movies is brilliant.
Right.
They have a process
Right.
for figuring that out. That's one of my faves.
Brilliant. I'm going to go get that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's very readable.
So, before we wrap up, Liz, is there how does anyone find out about you? Maybe someone wants to join your team of consultants or coaches. Maybe they want to access your online material. How do they find out more about you? Do you have any social media handles that they can contact your organization?
Yeah, we do. There are a couple websites. One is the wisemangroup.com that tells you a little bit about our firm.
Uh-huh.
And then there are the book websites, multipliersbooks.com, because we actually have a couple books. There's rookiesmarts.com. Hey, we're getting our act together. We're going to integrate all this into a website, but those are the three websites for now. On Twitter, I'm at Liz Wiseman.
Okay.
Got a good handle because I was an early adopter. That's what happens when you live right here in the heart of the valley, and Twitter's one of your clients. And there's a Facebook page, a Multipliers Facebook page, and people can find me on LinkedIn.
Brilliant.
I'm pretty easy to find. And there are all sorts of resources on the website. And then, if you just go out to YouTube, and there's book trailers, there's videos, there's speaking videos, there's a bunch of stuff out there that you could use if you wanted to incorporate any of these ideas into your, discussions at work or your own learning.
Liz, I've loved our conversation today, and I love your work. I love what you're doing, and guys, I've said it earlier, but I highly recommend you go and check out Liz's work and the materials that her team have created, especially if you're thinking about, growing as a leader, being a more effective leader, or maybe you're in an organization where you recognize that there's a diminishing effect that your leader has. You might want to just slide the Multiplier book underneath their door one day and, introduce them to it. It's a really, really great piece of work. Liz, thank you so much for your time today, man.
Thank you. And thank you for what you're doing to build great leadership in this rising generation. I love seeing your work. Thank you.
Thank you. So if you're looking for a speaker for your next event or a leadership coach, then I'd love to have a chat with you. Our 5 core abilities process helps leaders to grow in 5 particular areas. The first area is getting clarity about your vision and where you're heading. Number 2 is about developing a team around you, building a team to help you get to where you want to get to. Number 3 is about developing the confidence in order to move forward and to lead with conviction in spite of whatever challenges you might be facing. Number 4 is about creating and managing wealth. So important in your business or personal life. And number 5 is about productivity. We help you to get things done, to focus on the key things and eliminate or delegate the rest. It's all about getting things done. If that sounds like it might be of interest to you, then please drop us a line. I'd love to have a chat with you and explore working together. My email is www.errollawson.com. Thank you for listening.